All right, hi everyone. It's 3 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Edulastic for ELA. We're really happy that you're joining us today, and I want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day. Today's webinar is part of our Fall 2019 Teacher Talk webinar series, where we're bringing on really innovative and awesome educators to share how they use Edulastic in their respective classrooms. So I'm really happy that today we're joined by Natalie Kruzmeyer and Katie Breitholtz, and they're going to be sharing how they use Edulastic in their English classrooms. So sit back and relax and grab your favorite, maybe chocolate or coffee or tea. And once again, thank you for joining us. So before we officially get started, we have a few little housekeeping things to go over. First, my name is Jan Moody, and I'm a marketing specialist here at Edulastic. I am also joined today by Ileana Betancourt. She's a marketing manager here, and she's also in the room with me. And then also on the line is John Chen, and he's a customer success manager, and we'll all be working together, but John will especially be working to answer all of your more technical questions. We really want to make sure that when you leave today's webinar, all of your questions are answered, and that you really leave with the information that you were hoping to get out of this. So that's a nice little segue into my next point, which is about the chat. At the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a little bubble that says chat. Feel free to use this throughout the entire webinar to ask questions or add any insight or comments or collaborate with your peers about today's webinar. So at this time, if you could use the chat to share where you're tuning in from and maybe your favorite book. So my name's Jan, like I said, and our Edulastic office is located in Fremont, California. And I think my favorite book is probably The Kite Runner. While you guys are typing that up, I also want to share that at the bottom of your screen, there's one other very important thing about the chat. Please make sure that your chat is set to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see what you are what you are sharing. Regarding questions, at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A bubble, and you can use this to ask official questions. This is what myself and Ileana and John will be looking at to make sure that we can answer all of your questions. So please submit your official questions through the Q&A bubble. All right, so coming in through the chat, Ileana says her favorite book is How Not to Die. Oh, that's great. She shared it with me. Natalie says she's from Riverton, Wyoming, and Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. I love that book. Tyler Brown, tuning in from Philadelphia, New York. Harry Potter, I'm a big Harry Potter fan. Josh from Oregon, welcome. Bill says Sapiens, welcome, Bill. And Teresa is from Ohio, has lots of favorite books, but her favorite one right now is The Haunting of Hill House. I've never heard of that. I'll have to add it to the list. Katie says she's from Crystal Lake, Illinois, and Shouting at the Rain, and I loved it. I've heard of that. I've been meaning to read that. Oh, Sapiens is really interesting. I'll have to check that out. Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and I think we're gonna move right along. So I want to point out that today's webinar will be more ELA focused. And if you're looking for a more broad overview of Edulastic and an introduction to our features, we have that available on our YouTube channel. So if you want to check that out after today's webinar, I invite you to check out our YouTube channel. And I think that Ileana can share the link to our YouTube channel, especially to our Edulastic 101 webinar in the chat. So today, before I pass things off to Katie and to Natalie, I'm going to give a quick overview of Edulastic in the ELA classroom and some of the ways that we see teachers using it. So to start, I want to show you guys a few of Edulastic's tech enhanced items. What you see on your screen right now are the classic question types. So you see multiple choice, multiple selection, text dropdown, essay type, text entry, and true or false. These are really the classic question types that teachers have been giving forever, of course. And I really encourage everybody to use these in their class. But what I really want to point out today are these ELA tech enhanced items. These include passage-based sentence response, editing task, drag and drop, matching tables, classification, match the following multi-part, and resequence. There's a lot on Edulastic that's specifically catered to ELA teachers, and I really encourage you to specifically use these in your classrooms. I think of all of these, my favorite is probably passage-based questions. This allows teachers to upload long pieces of text and then tie different questions to that text. I also want to point out with our tech enhanced items, if you see the little question mark, this little question mark in the upper right-hand corner of each question type, you can click on that and a short video will play that kind of explains what type of question it is and how you can use it in your classroom. So here are just a few examples of a few TEIs that I found on Edulastic that really stood out to me and I think would be valuable to everybody. So this first one is a sentence response question type. And the teacher asks, which of the following sentences states the central idea of the passage? And students can go through and highlight which sentence they think is the main idea here. So in this case, it's the first sentence. But I thought that this was really neat, and it's a really great example of something that you can use in your classroom. This next one is a drag and drop question type. And so the teacher asks their students to read the following passage on, in this case, it's about humpback whales. And then their students can drag and drop their answers to either be correct, too broad, or too detailed. So that's just another example of an Edulastic Tech Enhanced item that you can use in your classroom. I want to point out today the most popular question types that ELA teachers are using. We see that our most commonly used question type amongst ELA teachers is multiple choice. 52% of ELA teachers use this. Essay questions are also used quite frequently, 13%. Multiple selection has 7%. Text drop down 5%, drag and drop 4%, and then sentence response 4%. I think the important thing to take away from this slide is that if you're new to digital assessment, if you're just now bringing Edulastic into your classroom, it's okay to start small and to start with those questions that you're really familiar with. And then as you get more familiar with digital assessment, as your students get more familiar with digital assessment, you can start bringing in more advanced question types. But it's totally okay to start with these more classic question types. One other thing that I want to point out before passing it off to our awesome presenters is that on Edulastic, all of the questions, all of the items, all of the assessments can be tied to state standards. This is one of the things that we hear from teachers that teachers really love. And we have pretty much every state standard loaded onto Edulastic. So that's what this little video shows. This is in the Edulastic question bank. If you just scroll through, you can see all of the different state standards, and you can search by standards. You can tie your own questions to standards. There's really so much that you can do here. And I also encourage you that if you don't see your standards on Edulastic, you can reach out to us at support@edulastic.com, and we'll do our best to make sure that your standards get uploaded onto Edulastic. Our support team is really great. They're really wonderful, and they're happy to help with either uploading standards or just with any other Edulastic questions that you may have. So at this time, I'm going to pass things off to Natalie. Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
I want to remind all of our attendees that you can use the chat or the Q&A bubble to ask questions throughout the entire webinar. But at this time, welcome Natalie. Natalie is a high school English teacher from Riverton, Wyoming, and we're really excited to have her here today. So take it away, Natalie. Just let me know when you need me to click to the next slide.
Okay, well, I'm really excited to be here because Edulastic, I think, is one of those, it was a free tool that I discovered as a teacher that really just changed my teaching. And it's one of those free tools that has other teacher resources on it, and I will shamelessly steal anything from any teacher as long as you're putting it out there. So one of the things that I love about Edulastic is that teachers have uploaded tests and quizzes. If I am stuck on something, if I am teaching a book and I just want to give some basic comprehension tests or quizzes, it's really easy for me to do that. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can use Edulastic in your classroom to target the standards and how you can look at data to target your standards. So if you would like to change or flip the slide. So Edulastic is perfect for the shift in the standards. And before we taught with the standards, it was a very like, oh, how does the text relate to yourself? And how does the text relate to the outside world? And now that we have more guidance in our classrooms for how to teach the standards, we also have to figure out how to test the standards. And so I took a little blurb from the Student Achievement Partners about college and career ready standards. And in the bold print on the screen that you could read on your own, I'll read it to you, but in the bold print, this is what Edulastic allows you to do and how to assess the standards. And so we have all these really great standards that let us hit our students with things that they're going to need for the real world. But the problem comes when you have to test them. And how can you test these standards? Because it's so much more stressful for our students, I think. with Common Core. It's good, but it's harder to integrate that into the classroom. And then it not only was a shift for our students, but it's a shift for us as teachers too. So the college and career ready standards place a premium on students writing to sources, and using evidence from text to present clear, full analyses, well-developed claims, and clear information. And rather than asking students questions that they can answer solely from their prior knowledge or experience, the standards expect students to answer questions that depend on him having read the text or texts with care. And as Jan pointed out, the passage-based sets, the enhanced ELA items help with that. The standards also require the cultivation of narrative writing throughout the grades. In later grades, a command of sequence and detail will be essential for effective argumentative and informational writing. And Edulastic addresses that with rubrics and with the constructed response items. And likewise, the reading standards focus on students' ability to read carefully and grasp information, arguments, ideas, and details based on text evidence. Students should be able to answer a range of text-dependent questions in which the answers require inferences based on careful attention to the text. And those are those Part A, Part B questions. And I know that once PARC came out, and when I lived in Louisiana for a while, and so we had LEAP, and all of our, like every principal that I've ever worked for is like, well, we need those Part A, Part B questions. Like you need to be hitting your kids with those Part A, Part B questions every day. And you can do it on paper, that's cool, but Edulastic does it so quickly for you. And with the tech enhanced items, you can do the Part A, Part B and have all of that data right there in front of you. And you can tag multiple standards. So you can tag that, the reading standard, like the one standard where they're collecting the knowledge or they're collecting the text evidence, and then you can tag it along with the standard that the question's actually testing, which is great. The Part A, Part B questions, I think that those are the ones that are the hardest for teachers to write, and I love that Edulastic has a database full of those questions. So Jan, if you want to flip the slide. So these are some of the questions that the tech enhanced questions that can address the standards really well. So things like the passage based, and that's where you can upload the passage so that, and I usually let students use a textbook. If we've been reading the book in class, like I let them hold the text in their hands, but I try to have, if it's a passage, I also try to have it in the platform as well. Sentence response, same thing, like they're able to look at these passage-based questions and then answer the question based on the text and use evidence. The multi-part questions, those are those Part A, Part B questions that I know all of your principals have been saying, have you been doing those Part A, Part B questions in class? And then the resequence questions, I've seen this on PARC tests and I've seen it on other state tests where they have to reorder events to put in an objective summary. And so that one's really helpful with that. I didn't star the drag and drop, but the drag and drop also works for the PARC style questions or the Common Core style questions where they can sort information. And the great thing about this too, like one of my kids said the other day, like, ooh, I love Edulastic. And I was like, well, that's kind of a nerdy thing to say. Like, why do you love Edulastic? He's like, well, it reminds me of state testing. And I'm like, okay, so you like to test? He's like, no, but when I take the test, I feel comfortable and I don't freak out. And so that's one of the best things I think about Edulastic is that they have these in tech enhanced items. And I know that our district uses a platform that doesn't have these tech enhanced pieces. And so anytime we want to address something like that, we're doing it on paper in the class, or we don't have Part A, Part B questions in our testing platform, and they can't do resequencing in our platform. And so the kids don't get practice with it. And the first time they see it is on their state test, and that's that I can see where that would stress them out. So I love that I'm able to get my kids comfortable with that, and I'm sure that they don't love the quizzing part of it, but they like the part where they can get comfortable with it. Jan, if you want to flip my slide. All right, so then the classic question types that Jan was talking about, like multiple choice, multiple selection, essay type, all of these are also available for those Part A, Part B questions. So when you're designing a Part A, Part B question, you're able to put in widgets. So I can put a multiple choice for Part A and multiple select for Part B. Or I can do multiple choice for Part A and sentence select for Part B, where they're choosing a sentence out of a paragraph. Or I can do text drop down in Part A, and I can do multiple choice in Part B. And so that also prepares them. It gets them thinking in different ways, and it gets them to analyze the text in different ways while they're actually taking the test. If you want to flip the slide. And Susie just asked, can we see a sample of these? Susie, I'm going to show you some data in a few minutes, and it'll show you an example of the Part A, Part B questions. So Common Core asks you to look at, let me see, Common Core asks you to look at literacy in a lot of different ways. And the way that I like to think with these, and that I was taught that these components of literacy work, is that they're like cogs in a machine, and they're all interdependent on each other. So like, for example, we have fluency right in the middle, and if a kid isn't fluent, they're not going to be able to read complex text, they're not going to do close reading, they're not going to be able to do to finish off the volume of reading that's required for them to move on to different reading levels, and evidence-based writing is going to be very hard for them. And so Edulastic obviously can't address all of these different cogs of literacy, but it can address 5 specific ones really well. In the academic language and academic vocabulary. So whenever I'm writing a question stem in Edulastic, I always make sure that it mimics the standard. And I make sure that the language of the standard is in the question, because the state tests are going to have the language of the standard in the question. And a lot of teachers like to dumb down the standards and put it in like student-friendly language, but that's not going to be helpful for your students then when they come across it later. So my tests in Edulastic are a little harder because I use that academic language, but they've seen it so many times. Like, we take at least 1 quiz a week, and they've seen it so many times that it's fine. They're used to it. They don't freak out when they see it anymore. And the same thing with academic vocabulary. With the passage-based tests and with the Part A, Part B questions, I'm able to test their vocabulary not just on what they're remembering from class, but I'm able to test them based on what they're able to infer from the text. And that's helpful, and it's helped my students with their reading levels a lot too, because they don't get as tripped up or worried about words. They're able to go back. Like, they know that my expectation of them is that on a quiz, they're going to have to be able to use context clues to determine the meaning of a word. So they do it now while they're reading. It doesn't scare them anymore. The passage-based questions allow us to test that complex text and make sure that those tests are right. And there are a ton of tests already on Edulastic that have been put there by teachers. And Edulastic has a great new feature that's the Edulastic promoted items. I forget what it's called, but these complex texts are there, and you're able to just pull from resources that are already out there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The Edulastic does do close reading with the passage set questions, and then the evidence-based writing. And with the evidence-based writing, there's rubrics that you can use to grade and score your writing, which is very helpful, because I pull the rubrics that are on the state test and I put them into my Edulastic, and that's how I grade my students, so that by the time the state test comes, they're very comfortable with that rubric. And I realize that I'm saying state test, state test, state test, and I am not teaching to the test, but I'm teaching so that my students are comfortable when the test comes. I'm still teaching them everything that they need to know. I mean, the rubric that's on the state test is based on writing, and they need to know how to write argument pieces, and they need to know how to write informational pieces, and the passage-based questions help them to do that. Jen, you can flip the slide. So the way that I outline my my item sets. So say that I've decided I'm a teacher and I'm going to put a passage item set on and make an item set test for it. And it's a cold read test. My students have never seen the passage before. And so I took this from the Louisiana Believes website. I find that it's really easy to do item sets if I have this tool in front of me. And this is called the reader circles. And what I'm doing is I'm asking them questions that start with observation questions and go up to analysis questions. And I'm not going to start with a theme question or a purpose question because that's a higher level of thinking. So I want to make sure that I'm asking those questions later and that I'm leading my questions up to that. So I'm going to ask questions about the author's craft and elements and structure before I even get to literary effects and meaning. Jan, you can flip the slide. And so a nice example of this is The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. And I am a whole to part thinker, which means that I can tell you what the theme is of that story after reading it, but I probably can't tell you how I got there. But most of my students are part to whole thinkers, which means that they can't tell me the theme, but they can get there gradually. And so The Telltale Heart, if I start with word choice and connotation and ask them a question about the reader's or the author's craft, and they're able to pull out that word choice and get that and answer that question successfully and feel successful on that, then if I lead into a question about tone, they're going to feel a little bit more comfortable with tone. And the word choice directly affects tone. And then the tone is going to directly affect the irony in the story, and that's where we're going to get the theme of, you know, the narrator and how he was so nervous. So this is the way that I structure the item sets that I'm putting into Edulastic. But this is also the way that I'm going to look at my data when it comes back from Edulastic. So Jan, if you can flip the slide. So I love everything Edulastic, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a panelist on this webinar. Like, I offered to be a panelist because I love everything Edulastic. But one of the best things about Edulastic is that I can look at these questions, and Edulastic's going to break it down for me. If I click on the question analysis report, I'm able to see which questions my students struggled with right away. And they show me this graph here. So I can see right away that when we read the Of Mice and Men and the kids took the chapter 3 quiz, that question 6 threw over half of my kids. And actually 48% isn't a bad number for a test, but so we have that 48% of our kids that didn't do very well on it. And so if you look down at the bottom of the screen, or actually, Jan, you can flip the slide. So I know that the 48% is bad, but if I look down at the bottom of the screen and I see that the question 6 is what they got wrong, I can also see where the standards are tagged. And it was standard 1 and standard 3 for grades 9 to 10 ELA, reading literature. And so I've been in PLCs where I have instructional coaches and principals and assistant principals coming in and telling us, like, what standards did your kids do poorly on? How are you going to reteach that standard? And that's not how we can look. We can't look at ELA like that. Like, I can't go back to my kids and say, oh, standard 3, we're going to reteach characterization, because I don't know if that's what trips them up on it. So the greatest thing about Edulastic is that bottom red arrow where it's pointing to question 6. I can click on that question 6. Jan, will you flip the slide? And so when I click on the question 6, not only do I see the question, and this is, Susie, this is what I was talking about when I'm able to show you the part A, part B questions. This was a part A with a multiple choice and a part B with a multiple select. And the question was, what does the shooting of Candy's dog most reveal about Carlson and the other men on the ranch? I'm able to scroll through and see what all of my kids answered on this question, so that I can see that when the correct answer was supposed to be they see weakness as a threat and something that needs to be removed. Well, that's kind of more of a theme question. It is a character stem, but the answer choice is what was tripping them up. Like, they understood how the characters acted, but they weren't able to connect it to a theme. And so this student put that they're selfish and looking out for themselves. And I can see where there was some misconceptions in selecting the evidence, but if the part A was incorrect, then the part B was probably incorrect too. It can also show me for different types of misconceptions. Jan, will you flip the slide? So this student, I can see that part A, they missed it, but part B, they didn't even select the 2 pieces of evidence. So for this student, I know that I need to go back and trust me, this wasn't the only student, but I need to go back and make sure that they're reading the stems correctly and reading them carefully. And when it says 2 pieces of evidence, that they're able to select the 2 pieces of evidence. I always make sure too that I bold things like that in my question stem, and Edulastic lets you do that. They let you put in pictures, they let you bold, italicize, change the fonts. So it's a good tool where you can help students go in the correct direction. The student didn't, but I'm able to address that now in my classroom because I saw where that misconception was. I didn't just see that the student missed standard 3. Like, the student missed a lot more than standard 3. They're missing the stems of the question. All right, Jan, will you flip the slide? So with that, I know that instead of characterization, when I'm focusing on reteaching for the kids that missed this, I'm not going to focus on characterization. Instead, it was the details and the literary devices that got them to characterization. That's where they lost the characterization. They weren't able to make inferences about the characters because they didn't completely understand the details and the literary devices and how those 2 things worked together. So I'm able to go back to my reader circles and really look at the way that the question was structured, but also the way that their thinking is structured from that observation to analysis piece. And the analysis piece is usually where a lot of my constructed response questions come from. So that is how I develop item sets and how my PLC looks at data from the item sets. And are we doing questions right now, Jan, or are we going to move on to and then do questions at the end?
So if anybody has any questions right now, we definitely can address those, but we definitely have an allotted Q&A time at the end where my guess that's when more questions will arise.
Okay.
So thank you so much. That was a really amazing presentation. We loved it.
Thank you.
That was really, really great. Thank you for sharing. So at this time, is there anything else that you want to add, Natalie?
Oh, no, I'm going to mute myself. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then Katie, if you are ready, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and turn your video off. And then, oh, hi, I see you.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good.
So for this first little bit, I can click through your slides and then let me know when you're ready to share your screen and I will stop sharing.
Okay, so just a quick intro. I'm Katie Breitholtz. I am an EL learning specialist, which basically means that I work with all English learners and all of my students have IEPs. So I work with any students with disabilities, basically. So we're battling language and disability at the same time. It's really a unique challenge. And I've been using Edulastic for about 3 years now. And I absolutely love it. Just like Natalie, I love all things Edulastic. And I'm such a nerd and I share it all the time and like tell teachers they need to use it. So I'm excited to be on the panel and sharing how I use it in my classroom. If you'd like to click to the next slide then, Jan. Okay, so I kind of come at Edulastic, and when I make my tests and my assignments for my students with this in mind of what are you testing? Are you testing language or are you testing content? So working with ELs, I find that it is it's something we have to constantly think about, and we have to be cognizant of when we are testing for language and we are testing for content. So with ELA, a lot of the times it comes in that you're testing for content, and so you want to be conscious of making sure that you're not actually forcing the language component onto your students and making them, in addition to being an English learner, struggle to produce the language that they need to show that they know the content. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the question types that I like and that I use a lot with my students. Okay, Jan, if you want to go to the next one. So I'm going to focus on 3 question types that I find that are really awesome in ELA, and just ways that you can use them either to support your English learners and any students with disabilities. And so I'll take you through what one of my assessments would look like. I actually just did one today with a drawing response, and my kids were loving it. They were having so much fun with it, like changing all the colors. So I'm excited to kind of show you just what that looks like from the student perspective. So Jan, I'm gonna share can I share my screen then?
Yes, definitely. I will
Okay.
stop sharing right now, and then you should be able to take over sharing.
Okay, bear with me guys, this is my first time. Okay, does everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Jan? Okay, so this is a preview of something I put together with a bunch of different questions that I've used over the years. So my first one here is a drag and drop, which I know Natalie talked about, and I was really excited that she mentioned it because I really love this question type. And this is where, as an EL teacher, I can focus on the content. Can you sequence a story? Can you put it together on a plot diagram? And can you actually do it in the order that it needs to be? If I didn't use a question type like this, I would use the resequencing as another one that I think is fantastic. So with this, it's really helpful that you can just pick and you can just drag and drop these. And so I'm just literally showing you how the kids can manipulate this, and you can have it where it fits in, which I know that obviously doesn't go there based on the size of the box, but the kids, it will auto fit your wording, and you can adjust this so that you can see the parts of your picture that you want. And I find that with my students, it's very helpful. And I can even modify this question further for my students who have accommodations. So like I would even put in like a couple of the events if I felt that it was necessary. One thing to remember is I do work with middle schoolers, so it's just a little less intense sometimes, I think, than when we get to the high school level. But so again, just really easy, nice, that you can just move through these and the students can manipulate the boxes very easily. And I find that they have no trouble with these. Here's another example of a drag and drop that I've used. And so you, again, can add pictures with your drag and drop. And so this one I have where they have to put the description to each of them. So I can actually show these then. Oh, wait, that's not true. And so it's very easy to move through these questions. And actually, if you saw, I made a mistake, and so I can move them pretty simply, and then the kids don't have any issues. Another thing to draw your attention to is up top, you get some of the nice features with flagging a question that if you aren't sure of it, the student can come back to it later. And they also give a hint button, which I'm a big fan of with ELs for anything that requires writing. I like to use that for sentence starters or anything that might draw their attention to something that would help them and help provide any sort of accommodations. So this is the drawing response. The drawing response is actually found under the math tools. So if you notice, you see a lot of math things up here, but I found that my students can use this to show how much they know or what they've read without requiring them to use more language. So I work with students that range anywhere from newcomers all the way to students transitioning. And it makes this, makes my job a lot easier when I can put in questions like this, because it takes away some of that, and it makes it less intense or a little less nerve-wracking for them. So you have the opportunity to change colors here just by clicking the button. And then, so I'm gonna use red. And then you can also change the size. So I had students, so we are reading a book called Touching Spirit Bear. If any of you are familiar with it. My students love it, especially with the bear mauling. And so they are using it to show the wounds that our main character had, and how the two characters knew that he was mauled by a bear and he didn't get hurt just in the storm. And so they can literally draw on the body and show, oh, this is not a very good drawing, sorry guys. They can show how they know and what they read without having to write about it. I even had students though that used the text box and were able to write and articulate their ideas further because they felt like they didn't do a very good job showing it. But again, for your newcomers or any students with disabilities, sometimes being able to put those, put everything into words can be a little bit more challenging. So I find that this is a very cool way for students. Another idea was even using it for characterization, and where you split the body in half and talking about what's inside and what's outside, talking about like character traits. And I've seen that as well, and it's a very cool tool for the students. Again, working with newcomers, I've used this where I use my images as options. And so the students are able to use the multiple select, put in and use their images to help figure out what do I know what what pink is. And so they can use images to help identify where you're not using more language, but you're focusing on, can you figure out what it is? And then again, here's another one, was select all the nouns. And I gave an image and the word next to it, so in case they weren't sure. And so they can figure out, I can test again, content, can you figure out what the nouns are? And they can then select these. Another thing that I like though is at the end is that I flagged a question and the students know to go back to it and they can check their work before they go. So this is a pre-made assessment that I just had put together for this, and you can just see a little preview here. Okay, Jan, how do I switch back?
So at the bottom of your screen, or at the top actually, there's a little button that says stop sharing.
Oh, there we go.
And if you want to click that, then I can take it back over.
Yes.
Share. Perfect. Okay. So at this time, Katie, is there anything else that you want to add?
I do want to add one quick thing. I can say that as a teacher who is a special ed teacher, I find that it's super helpful with Edulastic that I can take an assessment that has been put together for all the gen ed students, no students that need any accommodating, and I can literally make a copy of the test, and then I can either like take out an option, or I can add in some extra wording. I can put in sentence starters in the hints box, and I can really make sure that any of my students that have accommodations can really have them met, and I can do that within minutes of having the original done. And it's simplified my work, and it really helps with my students too. And so I can get a better picture of what they know and making sure that they're being accommodated and their IEP goal, like IEP, is being met. And so I will say Edulastic has really changed the game when it comes to assessing students, and it's pretty amazing.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Katie. We love to hear that and really enjoyed your presentation. So thank you. Thank you again. So at this time, I think we can move on to Q&A. So I'm going to turn my video back on, and then if Katie and Natalie, if you both want to turn your video and mic back on, and then everybody in the audience, feel free to fire away your questions, either in the chat or in the Q&A bubble. Kimberly said she didn't know about the hints, and she's so thankful because now she can use this in her classroom.
I also really love the solution box. I just recently started using it, and man, oh man, is it helpful. I don't know, Natalie, if you use it very often, but sometimes when you get in the groove and you start grading stuff, it really helps just having that, like, what you're really looking for and some of their questions. Because I feel like after a while, when you keep seeing the wrong thing, you're like, what am I looking for now? So to make a question.
Definitely. So I have a question. For both of you, where are you both finding your question types? Are you creating them yourself, or are you getting them from the Edulastic Certified Item Bank or the internet? Just where are you getting them?
I'm usually creating my own, but if I'm starting a new unit, I'm going to look at the text that I'm going to teach. And one of the first things that I do when I'm going out looking for what resources are already out there is I'm going to Edulastic to see if there's tests and quizzes already made up for it or not. So do I need to reinvent the wheel? Katie mentioned that she was able to accommodate her students by using their accommodations in there. She's able to like reword question stems for them. And that's a great thing to do too. So sometimes like we're doing Of Mice and Men right now, I'll find an Of Mice and Men comprehension quiz that's already out there, and I'll copy that over, and then I'll add some of those Part A, Part B question types to it, so that I'm testing their comprehension, like were they paying attention, did they read it, but I'm also testing their analysis of the book too. And so that's one of the cool things that you can do, is that if you find a test and it's not exactly what you want, you can modify it to make it exactly what you want. You can change item stems, you can add hints, you can add questions, reorder them.
I feel, Natalie, like I do the same thing as I start on Edulastic with a lot of stuff and see what's already there. And sometimes I like some of the questions I find on there better than what I was originally thinking. So it helps. And then I do add in a lot of my own, and I co-teach my classes. So it's really nice that I have another person I'm working with to kind of bounce ideas off of. So sometimes we'll work in our own, or we'll, just adapt a question that's already on there. And sometimes we'll pull from the internet, because sometimes people have really good questions out there that you're like, hey, I love this. And so, but I really do, I have to say, like, when I do create my own, I really make sure that I'm conscious of what we're looking for in our work, and like choosing the question type then.
Susie, you asked if I'm copying and pasting a text or uploading it as a PDF. PDF's an option, but I found that it's easier to copy and paste the text. But usually I copy and paste it to a Google Doc first, and then I modify it and change any fonts, change everything before I move it over. Because sometimes it can get wonky with just like going directly from the source to Edulastic. It's easier to do the Google Doc in between.
I would second that too, Natalie. I do the same thing.
That's a good tip. And I'm actually wondering if, Ileana, do you mind talking a little bit about Snap Quiz?
Oh, yeah.
Speaking about PDFs and paper. Snap Score.
Snap Score. Snap Quiz. That's what it is. Yeah, not Snap Score. Sorry. Should I just pop over where you are?
Sure.
I'm gonna slide you away.
I'll just give you these.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay. So we do have a way, for those of you, noticed that we have some people who are brand new on Edulastic. If you have a test that's already written on a PDF or a piece of paper, you can also upload it through PDF, and you can add questions with little widgets as a quick way to get it automated and use it. It's better to make your own question types fresh because you can reuse those questions more easily and tweak them more easily. You have a lot more flexibility, but as a quick way to just get it online, get it digital, you can do that as well. I'll add the link in the chat.
Awesome. So I hope that answers the question that came up in the chat. And we have a new question as well. Leanne says she's a new teacher and she's new to Edulastic. And she's wondering if you use this platform for pre and post tests or diagnostic tests. And if so, is the data that Edulastic provides, is that helpful to you?
Yes, I can sort my data by student, I can sort it by test, I can see where they've grown throughout time. And so yes, I do use it for diagnostics, pre and post test.
I do the same thing. My district requires us to do SLOs, which are student learning objectives. And so I am very reliant on Edulastic and the work that I put into our pre and post tests, because the reports are awesome and I can give my administration the kind of information that they're looking for. So it's really nice. Not to mention, I can also figure out then really drill down into like the standards that I need to focus on where the students need the most practice during the unit then.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys for sharing that. I second all of that. We hear that a lot. Let's see. Are we having any other questions roll in?
There's a question in the Q&A.
Perfect. Okay. This Jacqueline in the Q&A says, does Edulastic play nicely with tablets and smartphones and learning management system, LMSs? So Edulastic works best on tablets or Chromebooks or anything that has a little bit of a bigger screen. We don't recommend that you use Edulastic on a smartphone, but an iPad is great. A Chromebook is great, like I said. And then as far as our integration with LMSs, we do integrate with a large variety of LMSs. And I think that John Chen can give some more specifics on that.
Before John jumps on, I use Google Classroom with Edulastic because it integrates so seamlessly. Like I sync my classes with Google Classroom. All of my students are in there. And so when I assign them a test, all I need to do is say, go to Edulastic. They go to Edulastic, log in with their district email, and the test is right there. They don't have to have a code. They don't have to go to some funky site or click on a link. They just go directly to Edulastic, log in with Google, and there's the test for them.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Natalie. I have another question. So it seems that we have some other new users online today, and I think that there will be some new users who watch this webinar at a later time. What tips do you, Natalie and Katie, have for people who are just starting on Edulastic? They open the app for the first time. How would you recommend they get going?
I would suggest starting small. And get yourself familiar with kind of the platform itself and create a couple practice quizzes or like practice tests to put together and get your kids familiar with it before you give an actual assessment. And kind of just start with what's on there before you like overwhelm yourself and like try to create a whole assessment from scratch. just because I think it's easier that way. I also find that in the beginning of the year when I have students who are new to Edulastic themselves, I do a fun one and I do a bunch of different question types on there and let them practice and let them play and just ask silly things of them, like your favorite candy and what do you like to do, and do like multiple select and drag and drop and that kind of thing to get them comfortable. And then it kind of helps you as the teacher understand, hey, what do I need to make sure my kids understand with this? And then while they're getting familiar with that, then you can take the time to kind of put in maybe your own questions and kind of work through the kinks on your end before you give it to them for real.
Yeah, I would start by either assigning something fun, like Katie said, or assigning something that's already out there. So you're not playing with every little detail of the program in the beginning, maybe just doing a multiple choice style quiz. And then as you grow, Edulastic can grow with you.
Definitely. I think starting small is a great suggestion, especially those fun quizzes. We actually have a blog post that has a whole bunch of fun quizzes, and Ileana may be able to share that in the chat for teachers who want to maybe give that on a Friday even. That could be a fun thing to learn about your students in a new way as well. So at this time, I have a couple more slides to show everybody, but please continue to ask your questions in the chat and in the Q&A bubble, and then if any more arise, then we can revisit them at the end. But I do want to point out that tomorrow actually is our last Teacher Talk webinar for this fall, and that is on Edulastic for Science. So we really encourage you to tune in and to join us. That's at 3 p.m. tomorrow, so same time as this one. And I know that most people here are probably English teachers, but I'm sure you have science colleagues, and so maybe that would be valuable to them. So I encourage you to share that with them. And earlier I mentioned our YouTube channel. I just want to bring this back up, that on our YouTube channel we have a whole bunch of old webinars, a whole bunch of new webinars, like a million how-to videos, and so many other different resources for teachers that really answers a lot of questions and kind of walks teachers through how the best ways to use Edulastic in their classroom. And so lastly, thank you again for everybody for joining us today. And then please stay in touch with us. We are really active on social media, and this is where we post all of our newest updates and our exciting announcements. So like I said, on YouTube or on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, our handle is @Edulastic. So we will stay online and kind of wait to see if there's any more questions that filter in. But once again, thank you everybody so much for joining us for Edulastic for ELA.